He was just a 6-year-old drawing dinosaurs on the sidewalk when two strangers in fake HOA vests shoved him so hard his tiny body cracked against the pavement. Blood pooled beneath him as his parents screamed, and one of the men reached for a gun. But what they didn't know was that a neighbor had already called for help, and what came next would shake the nation. It was the kind of Sunday morning that made you believe the world could still be quiet and good. The sun hung low over the tops of the sycamore trees, casting long, warm shadows across the freshly mowed lawns. The street was still, the kind of stillness that only comes after a light overnight rain and before the first leaf blower of the day. Nate Brooks stood barefoot on the porch, cradling a warm mug of black coffee in his hands, steam curling upward like a lazy question mark. The sky was that perfect, impossible shade of blue. Somewhere in the backyard, his wife Samantha was humming along to a Fleetwood Mac song, flipping sausage patties on the grill with the kind of ease only Sundays allow. Their son Daniel was out front, just beyond the white hydrangeas, crouched low to the pavement. A 6-year-old with an artist's focus and a pale green T-Rex plastered across his hoodie, Daniel had spent the last hour bringing prehistoric creatures back to life with nothing but sidewalk chalk and pure imagination. He didn't speak as he worked, just knelt there, tongue slightly out, carefully dragging a stick of blue across the sidewalk. Today's masterpiece was a 10-foot mural, a stegosaurus locked in fierce, crayon-colored combat with a towering triceratops. Nate watched, smiling. Every now and then Daniel would glance up, just to make sure someone was watching. And Nate always was. He didn't even hear the SUV at first. Just felt it, a low rumble that didn't belong. The black Chevy Suburban glided around the corner, slow and deliberate, its windows tinted to the point of menace, no front plate, just a matte black grille and an engine that growled like it was holding back something darker. It stopped right in front of their house, directly in front of Daniel. Nate's body moved before his brain did. He stepped forward, mug lowering to waist height. Something about the way the vehicle sat there, idling, like it had all the time in the world, set every parental alarm in him blaring. The front passenger window hissed down and out stepped two men. They looked like someone had ordered private security off a discount military surplus site. Tactical boots, black shirts, khaki vests that read HOA in thick block letters across the front. No badges. No names. No clipboards. Just authority, manufactured and worn like armor. Nate narrowed his eyes. He knew everyone on the HOA board. He'd been to every meeting since they moved here 4 years ago. He remembered the terrible coffee and the laminated agendas. He would have remembered these too. The first man was older, bald, thick-necked, with a square jaw like a meat grinder. The second, younger and wiry, had a twitchy kind of energy and a small tablet in hand. They didn't smile. They didn't introduce themselves. They just walked straight toward Daniel. "Excuse me," Nate called, stepping off the porch. "Can I help you?" The bald one ignored him and pointed to the sidewalk. "This your son?" he asked, voice like crushed gravel. Daniel looked up from his stegosaurus. His eyes were wide but not afraid yet. Just curious. Nate stopped walking. "Yes," he said. "That's my son." "What's going on?" The twitchy one held up the tablet. On the screen was a blurred document, header reading, Community Regulation Violation, Code 4.17, Public Defacement of Shared Surfaces. Nate blinked. "It's sidewalk chalk." "Doesn't matter," the bald one snapped. "It's still unauthorized use of HOA property. Per Section 4.17b, that constitutes defacement and mischief." Nate lowered his voice. "Who exactly are you?" The twitchy guy didn't answer. He just stepped closer to Daniel, crouching as if inspecting a crime scene. Daniel looked at him, confused, holding a piece of orange chalk in one hand. "Hey," Nate barked, louder this time. "Back away from my kid." Samantha appeared at the gate, spatula still in hand, sunglasses perched atop her head, drawn by the change in Nate's voice. "Everything okay?" she called. The bald man turned to her and barked, "Stay where you are, ma'am." That was when Nate knew without question, something was wrong. Real wrong. These men weren't from the HOA. They weren't from anywhere official. They didn't even have radios. Real HOA reps always carried clipboards and talked too much. These guys? They moved like people who had something to hide. Nate took a step forward, hands raised in a calming gesture. Okay, look, whatever this is, you're way out of line. He's 6. That's chalk. If you have a problem, you bring it to me. The bald man didn't hesitate. In one terrifying motion, he stepped past Nate, reached out, and shoved Daniel. It wasn't a push. It was a calculated, violent lunge. The sound was worse than anything Nate had ever heard. The crunch of bone meeting concrete, the scream that tore from Daniel's mouth, and then nothing. Just stillness. Nate dropped the coffee. The mug shattered. He ran. So did Samantha. But she was screaming now, Daniel's name again and again. Nate reached his son first. Daniel was crumpled on the pavement, blood pooling beneath his elbow, leg bent sideways, face pale as porcelain. His eyes fluttered. His mouth moved but no sound came out. Oh God. Oh God, no, Nate whispered, lifting his son gently, cradling his head. Call 911, he shouted behind him. Already doing it. Samantha yelled, punching numbers into her phone with trembling fingers. Then the twitchy one reached for something at his waistband. Nate saw the flash of metal. Gun. Samantha screamed. But then, the sound of screeching tires, the scream of sirens, a booming voice amplified through a loudspeaker, drop your weapon. Hands in the air. SWAT vehicles roared in from both ends of Sycamore Lane. Doors flew open. Uniformed officers flooded the street, rifles raised, commands slicing the air like thunder. The two imposters froze. Twitchy dropped the weapon immediately. Bald raised his hands, but not before flinching, his last show of defiance. They were on the ground in seconds, face down, arms yanked behind them, zip-tied and surrounded. Daniel was lifted onto a stretcher, neck stabilized, vitals checked. Nate sat in the yard, covered in his son's blood, rocking slightly, repeating Daniel's name like a spell. A paramedic asked gently, "What's his name?" "Daniel," Nate rasped. "Stay with us, Daniel," the medic said. "You're gonna be okay, buddy." They didn't let Nate or Samantha ride in the ambulance. Protocol, they said. Too many people. Liability. So Nate rode in a cruiser, hand clenched around Samantha's so tight he thought he might crush it. At the ER, Daniel was rushed into surgery. 26 fractures. 1 collapsed lung. Skull trauma. A compound fracture in the femur. Nate sat in the hallway outside or two staring at a vending machine that refused to give him a Snickers. He hadn't cried yet. Not because he didn't want to, but because if he started, he didn't think he'd stop. The last thing Daniel had said that morning echoed in his mind. "Dad, do you think Stegosauruses ever got scared?" He hadn't answered then. Now he knew exactly what fear looked like. And it wore a fake HOA vest. The hospital lights were too white, too harsh, like they were trying to bleach the memory out of Nate's brain, but it wouldn't go. That sound still rang in his ears, the sickening crunch of his son's body hitting the pavement, the soft whimper before Daniel passed out in his arms, the scream Samantha made that didn't sound human. Now, he sat in a hard plastic chair outside the OR, his jeans soaked with his son's blood, dried and flaking. His knuckles were scraped raw from where he had punched the sidewalk, not out of rage, but because he needed to feel something that wasn't terror. Samantha sat across from him, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. No one spoke. The silence was only broken by the occasional echo of a gurney wheel or the rustle of scrubs. Every time footsteps approached, Nate's heart stuttered. Then the door opened. A woman in green surgical scrubs and a ponytail stepped out, mask pulled down around her neck. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, they both stood at once. The doctor's face was lined with exhaustion, but steady. Daniel is stable. He's in recovery. We managed to reduce the pressure on his skull, and the lung has been reinflated. He's sustained 26 fractures, including 2 compound breaks and 1 near the spine, but, and I say this with great caution, there's no sign of paralysis. Nate sagged against the wall. Samantha sobbed once and covered her mouth. When can we see him? Nate asked. Soon, the doctor said. We're moving him to pediatric ICU. He'll be sedated for a while, but he made it. That boy is a fighter. The next hours blurred. Machines beeped, nurses moved around like quiet angels, and Daniel lay there, pale, bandaged, tubes snaking from his tiny body. Nate sat at his side, unmoving. He held one small, bruised hand and stared at the same dinosaur sticker on the floor stand for 2 hours. He barely noticed when a woman in a dark suit stepped into the room. She waited, respectfully, until Samantha noticed. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, I'm Detective Elena Garza, she said, her voice low and calm, like a voice used to delivering hard truths. I know this is the worst possible time, but we need to speak about what happened. We'll keep it short. Nate nodded, still holding Daniel's hand. Those men, Kyle Mercer and Brent O'Hara, are not affiliated with any homeowners association. They're not licensed security, and they have no legal right to enforce anything. Then what were they doing in front of my house? Nate asked. Dressed like that? Garza sighed. It appears they've been running an enforcement scam across multiple neighborhoods in the county, and likely beyond. They wear fake HOA uniforms, cite bogus violations, and threaten fines or compliance. In some cases, they've managed to collect money from frightened residents. So this is about money? Samantha asked. Garza hesitated. Not just. They've mostly targeted households with young children, especially where one or both parents are home. We believe they may have used intimidation or even threat of Child Protective Services involvement to coerce residents. In your case, we believe they may have intended to take Daniel. Nate's chest tightened. Take him? We're still investigating, Garza said. But the pattern fits. A similar incident occurred in Santa Rosa last month, another child, sidewalk chalk, 2 men matching this description. That child was pulled toward a vehicle, then released when neighbors intervened. That family was too scared to report it until now. Your case may open the floodgates. The next day, the media storm began. Somehow, a teenager from 2 houses down had caught the entire incident on his phone, from the moment the black Suburban pulled up to the SWAT takedown. The footage went viral overnight. Headlines spread, 6-year-old attacked by fake HOA enforcers, Suburban terror caught on camera, sidewalk chalk assault sparks national outrage. By midweek, morning shows were calling. Reporters hovered near the hospital. The family declined all interviews. Nate only cared about one thing, Daniel. But something shifted. Strangers began leaving flowers and stuffed animals outside the hospital. A mural of dinosaurs began forming on the sidewalk outside their home. And then came the arraignment. Nate and Samantha watched from the courthouse gallery, surrounded by neighbors, teachers, even local business owners. The imposters, Kyle Mercer and Brent O'Hara, were brought in separately, shackled, wearing orange jumpsuits. Their swagger was gone. Mercer's eyes were empty. O'Hara trembled. When the judge read the charges, the list sounded like a hammer dropping again and again: assault with intent to cause great bodily harm, impersonating a law enforcement officer, attempted kidnapping, child endangerment, fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. Bail was denied. Detective Garza testified first. She laid it all out: how Mercer and O'Hara had exploited HOA confusion to build a false sense of authority, how they printed fake citations, how they tracked homes where parents were least likely to resist. The courtroom went silent when she mentioned 3 previous incidents involving children. Then they showed the video. Nate braced himself. The courtroom lights dimmed. The screen lit up with shaky footage, Daniel drawing, then the black Suburban. The 2 men stepping out. The confrontation. Then the shove. The gasp in the courtroom was collective. Several people cried out. One woman ran out. Samantha didn't move, just held Nate's hand, eyes glassy. They played the clip again. And then again. The jury stared, stunned. The prosecutor leaned in. The only reason this boy is alive today is because SWAT happened to be close. Otherwise, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks might be speaking about their son in the past tense. Nate was called to testify. He tried to hold it together. He had prepared lines, practiced words, but when he stood before the courtroom, all that came out was raw truth. He was just drawing. Dinosaurs, Nate said, voice cracking. He wasn't hurting anyone. He wasn't on anyone's lawn. He was 6 years old. And they treated him like a criminal. No warning. No badge. Just violence. Like he didn't matter. Like he was a problem to be erased. The defense tried to spin it. Claimed miscommunication. Claimed the men thought they were legally authorized through a dissolved HOA from a neighboring county. No one bought it. Especially not the jury. Especially not the public. By the end of the week, the verdict came, guilty on all counts. Sentencing was swift, consecutive life terms, no parole. That night, as Nate and Samantha returned to the hospital, they found something new waiting on the sidewalk. A chalk drawing. Not Daniel's. Someone else had drawn him, smiling, standing, whole. In one hand, he held a shield. In the other, a stick of blue chalk. And written above him, in huge rainbow letters, were the words, "They tried to silence me. But I drew louder." Nate knelt beside it, hand trembling. And for the first time since that awful morning, he wept. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming, undeniable power of truth. The sidewalk where his son bled had become something else now, a battleground, yes, but also a beacon. And the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, they weren't alone. The chalk drawing on the driveway stayed untouched for days. Nate couldn't bring himself to wash it off. Neither could Samantha. It was more than just a picture, it was a declaration, a line in the sand drawn by a boy who couldn't yet walk but who had already stood taller than most men. Every morning, as the sun rose over Sycamore Lane, neighbors stopped to see it, to take photos, to kneel beside it in silence. Some left flowers. Some left notes. And slowly, the street that had once been the scene of a crime began to transform into something else, a place of strength. Inside the hospital, Daniel's recovery was measured in tiny victories. The first day he squeezed Nate's hand. The next, he opened both eyes. Then came the breathing without assistance, the whispered words, the painful shifts in bed. Physical therapy began only a week later. Doctors called it miraculous. But it wasn't. It was hard. It was Daniel waking up before sunrise to be fitted with braces. It was Samantha kneeling on the cold hospital floor massaging his legs while he whimpered through clenched teeth. It was Nate pacing the hallway, listening to his son cry, forcing himself not to punch another wall. Daniel endured 5 surgeries in 2 months. Bones were rebroken and reset. Screws and rods were placed along his spine and femur. And still, he fought. Still, he smiled. By the 3rd month, Daniel asked for chalk. It stunned the nurses. "Just to hold," he said. So they gave him a pack. And from his hospital bed, arms and slings and legs and casts, he began drawing again, on napkins, on paper plates, on anything he could reach. Dinosaurs, mostly. Some were armored. Some had wings. One had a giant shield on its back and a smile like his. That one, he said, was named Courage. The media requests never stopped. But the Brooks family made one thing clear: Daniel would decide how his story was told. And when he was ready, he said yes. The first interview aired on national television. Daniel sat propped up between his parents, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big and a cast that stretched from hip to ankle. The host asked, "What do you remember most about that day?" Daniel blinked, then said quietly, "I thought I was going to die. But then I heard my mom scream and my dad run. And then I knew I wasn't alone." The clip went viral. But more than that, it started something. Other families came forward. Parents from Nevada. Grandparents in Oregon. A single mother in Texas. All had been harassed by fake HOA enforcers. All had stayed silent. Until Daniel gave them the courage to speak. Within weeks, the Department of Justice launched Operation Boundary Line, a multi-state crackdown on fraudulent HOA activity. 11 arrests followed. Charges ranged from impersonation to attempted abduction. The Secretary of Homeland Security called it a wake-up call for neighborhood safety. Meanwhile, Daniel's original sidewalk mural, the one that had started it all, was still visible in faded colors. Nate couldn't look at it without reliving the sound of bones hitting concrete. But Daniel had another idea. "I want to finish it," he said one afternoon from his wheelchair. Nate blinked. "Finish what?" "The battle. Stegosaurus never got to win." Word spread quickly. And within a month, the city council approved a special mural grant. Local artists joined forces. So did children, neighbors, teachers, and volunteers. Together, they painted a massive, permanent mural across Sycamore Lane. At its center stood Daniel, drawn as a cartoon hero with a blue shield in one hand and chalk in the other. Surrounding him were creatures of all shapes and colors: dragons, dinosaurs, police dogs, eagles, and a triceratops in a cape. The mural was titled "The Path of Courage." On the day it was unveiled, a crowd gathered. Samantha gave a short, tearful speech. Nate simply stood behind his son, resting a hand on his shoulder. But it was Daniel who stole the moment. He rolled himself to the microphone, adjusted it carefully, and said, "Bad guys wear fake uniforms. They try to scare you. But they can't scare all of us." He paused, scanning the crowd. "You don't have to be big to be brave. You just have to speak up. And draw louder." Applause erupted. The mayor wiped away tears. By that evening, the mural had been featured on every major network. But the changes weren't just cosmetic. The Brooks family founded a nonprofit called Sidewalk Shield. Its mission: provide legal assistance, advocacy, and trauma counseling to families harassed or targeted by neighborhood-based impersonators or authority abusers. In its first 3 months, it helped 40 families file claims and assisted 18 ongoing lawsuits. Daniel was its founder. Nate and Samantha just ran the paperwork. In Washington, legislation was passed expanding protections against impersonation and unlawful enforcement. The new law, dubbed Daniels Act, required all HOA enforcement personnel to register with state databases and prohibited any form of physical contact or forced compliance. Violations became federal crimes when children were involved. Meanwhile, back in Sycamore Lane, change came in waves. The existing HOA board, already under fire, was investigated and ultimately dissolved for negligence and lack of oversight. Their failure to maintain updated records had left the door wide open for predators like Mercer and O'Hara. A new board was elected. One led by transparency, diversity, and accountability. But the biggest surprise came when the neighborhood unanimously voted to rename the local park Daniel Brooks Commons. Nate was stunned. "He's alive," he said at the meeting. "Isn't memorial for someone who's passed?" A woman named Carol, who'd lived on the street for 30 years, stood and replied, "We're not honoring his death. We're honoring his strength." The dedication ceremony was held 6 months after the incident. Daniel stood beside the police chief, his braces hidden beneath dress pants, his speech written in big block letters on 3 note cards. "I used to be scared," he said to the crowd, "but now I know the truth. Real heroes aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones who show up, even when they're afraid." He turned to the kids in the audience. "If someone says you don't belong, or your voice doesn't matter, or your chalk isn't allowed, draw anyway. That night, as the sun dipped low behind the sycamores, Nate and Samantha wheeled Daniel up their driveway. And there it was, another chalk drawing. This one wasn't Daniel's. No one knew who had left it. It showed a boy, standing tall, no casts, no crutches, holding a blue shield in one hand and a stick of chalk in the other. The boy's face was beaming. And above him, in bold, bright letters, were the words, "They tried to silence me. But I drew louder." Nate crouched beside the image, his throat tight. And then he picked up a piece of blue chalk and added one more line beneath it. Just 2 words. Still drawing. Thank you for staying with us through Daniel's story, a story that, though fictionalized, reflects very real fears, injustices, and the extraordinary strength that can rise in the face of them. At U.S. Justice Story, we don't just share tales to shock or stir emotions, we tell them to remind, to reveal, and most of all, to wake us up to what so many families in America are quietly enduring. Daniel Brooks may be a character, but what he went through is not far from the truth. In neighborhoods across the country, people are impersonating authority figures, exploiting fear, and using the illusion of power to control, intimidate, and even harm. The most chilling part? They often get away with it because we assume a vest, a clipboard, or a title means legitimacy. It doesn't. Here's the truth we hope you take away today. Real power protects, it never preys. Authority is not about volume or appearance, it's about service, responsibility, and respect. We must teach our children, and remind ourselves, to question what doesn't feel right. To speak up, even when we're scared. To defend the vulnerable, especially when it's inconvenient. Daniel's courage didn't come from age or strength, it came from knowing he wasn't alone. From the voice of his mother. The sprint of his father. The unity of his community. So here's our message to every listener today. Don't be silent. Not when something feels off. Not when someone abuses power. Not when fear tries to sit on your doorstep disguised as authority. And if you're ever made to feel small, remember Daniel. 6 years old. Broken bones. But unbroken spirit. And he drew louder. To the parents listening, teach your children that their voice matters. To the neighbors, check in, speak up, and stand together. And to anyone who's ever felt powerless, know this, courage doesn't need permission. It only needs you to begin. On behalf of U.S. Justice Story, I want to say thank you, truly thank you, for being here. For choosing stories that matter. For believing in truth, in justice, and in the quiet strength of everyday people. Every view, every comment, every share helps these stories reach more hearts, and we're honored to have you with us. Until next time, stay aware, stay kind, and never forget, even the smallest voice can shake the ground when it speaks with truth. And sometimes, the most powerful protest starts with a piece of chalk.